This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello and welcome to the Twilight Show. The topic of the show today is teaching, creativity and social justice. And I'm joined by a very special guest, Nick Bilbrough, teacher, trainer, ELT author, storyteller and founder and creative director at the Hands Up Project, whose activities include telling stories and supporting the English language development online for young learners, mostly in Palestine.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Twilight Show, everyone. I'm Graham Stanley, speaking to you live from Mexico City. On today's show, I'll be talking to Nick Bilbrough, whose activities in the world of education lie at the intersection between teaching, training, creativity, drama, storytelling, and social justice. Now, Nick founded the Hands Up Project in 2015. It's an organisation committed to social justice, global citizenship and freedom of expression, and upholds the belief that language learning is enhanced through creativity, performance and collaborative interaction. The vision of the project is to give opportunities for children in difficult circumstances, such as Palestine, to use English to communicate with one another across borders in a spirit of peace, dignity, tolerance, freedom, equality and solidarity, which comes from the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child from 1989. Now, my guest has taught and trained language teachers in many diverse contexts in Africa, the Middle East, South America and Europe, and is now self-employed and lives in Totnes in beautiful Devon in the UK. And I'll be talking to Nick about all of this and more after the Teachers Talk Radio news.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
This programme has been brought to you by the Happy Confident Company. Our clinically approved, ready-to-go wellbeing and mental health programme will help your pupils thrive. In only 10 minutes a day, you'll be able to deliver social and emotional learning and wellbeing tools throughout your school. To find out more, visit us at www.happyconfident.com.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The Telegraph reported this week on calls from some academics for schools to ban smartphones. The article refers to devices as extremely dangerous, over fears that they damage cognitive ability. The research by academics in Australia suggests that phones can be hazardous to children, as they have a negative effect on learning, social skills and mental health. Dr. Mark Williams, an honorary professor of cognitive neuroscience at Macquarie University in Sydney, is quoted as saying that having a phone in a pocket or bag decreases working memory capacity, and that this means children don't learn as well. He goes on to say that there are zero benefits to smartphones in school. Dr. Williams went on to add that other research studies have shown that smartphones also link to causes of depression, anxiety and body dysmorphia. In Spain, phones have been banned from schools in some regions since 2015. University of Valencia academics found that pupils' test scores in some core subjects improved. In the USA, researchers at an Ohio hospital found that screen time led to lower brain functioning, and a study in Malaysia published in 2020 found that the presence of a smartphone decreased the ability of undergraduates to accurately recall information. The current Department for Education advice in England is that head teachers are best placed to make decisions about phones and their use in school. The value of learning a foreign language is often discussed in schools, but in Germany, there have been calls for primary schools to scrap English lessons. The president of the German Teachers Association has said that schools should focus on German reading and maths instead. His remarks come as German students scored lower than their peers in other countries in the International Primary School Reading Survey. Heinz-Peter Meidinger told German broadcasters that focusing on English was a wrong priority, and that more attention should be paid to reading skills, writing skills, and arithmetic. The BBC reports that MPs have launched an inquiry into Ofsted school inspections, looking at how useful they are to parents, governors, and schools in England. Education Select Committee Chairman Robin Walker said Ofsted had an important role, but that there had been a groundswell of criticism in recent months. Ofsted itself has said it welcomed the inquiry, but that it had already made changes. MPs will consider how inspections affect the workload and well-being of school staff and pupils, and what contribution its reports make to helping schools improve. The issues likely to be discussed are the current system of awarding one overall grade to a school, and whether it is right to deem a school inadequate if inspectors raise concerns about child welfare. Parents, school governors, teachers and unions will be able to submit evidence alongside the government and Ofsted itself. Ofsted have already made changes, particularly to the complaints process, but the NAHT's Paul Whiteman said the changes didn't go far enough. Finally, in the West Midlands, the BBC reports that a 91-year-old former teacher is helping children develop their literacy skills from a living room. Diane Idles has 5 pupils she reads with over an online platform aimed at helping children progress with reading. She said the volunteering work had filled a huge hole in her life after the death of her husband. Mrs. Idles volunteers through the Bookmark Reading Charity, which matches trained volunteers with primary children struggling with reading. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This is 2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, this week I'm going to answer the question we all want to know. What is the best presentation software? I do promise to give you an answer this week after leaving you on a cliffhanger, but first, a quick recap for those who missed last week or fast-forwarded me. Considering most lessons delivered in a classroom contain some sort of presentation, it's possible that our students are facing up to 1,000 presentations a year. This isn't a bad thing as we are presenting information, and that's what the software is designed to do. However, like a display you spend ages on, how long does it take before it stops being noticed? Do we really know what experience a pupil gets through a typical week in school? Are they being engaged, or do they know how to look like they are listening? Don't worry, there is no way I'm going to mention slant here if you were thinking that is where I was going next. The answer is there is no best presentation software. As I've already mentioned, there are lots of free and paid for presentation apps out there. The key to success is which one do you choose. This is where a lot of people go wrong. They ask someone else's opinion. What works for one may not work for another. The choice you make depends on 2 key words: purpose and audience. When you choose the method of presentation for a lesson, you need to be thinking about the best way to grab focus. In the end, our job is to encourage long-term remembering. So if the lesson is about remembering short text-based facts and you have powerful images that back up what you're saying, a looping PowerPoint presentation or equivalent may do the job. Do you want to embed a lot of web links and videos? Why not take a look at Wakelet, a free way to collect web links together and share them. You can present with it and then hand the link off for self-discovery. Most app developers today aim to make their apps intuitive, so changing things around shouldn't be too hard for you to get to grips with, and you may just find engagement rises, and in the end, that's what it's all about. What do you do to engage pupils? Let us know at TT Radio Official. I'm Steve Woods, and that was 2 Minute Tech.
2 Minute Tech with Steve Woods, your tech briefing on Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello, welcome back everyone, and welcome in particular to Nick Bulber, my special guest today. Hello Nick, are you there? How are you?
I am, Graham. Yeah, thank you very much for having me on the show. Yeah, I'm very well. I've just come back from a beautiful swim in a river on Dartmoor National Park. So been a beautiful day in the UK. So
Fantastic.
yeah.
That's wonderful. Was it not too cold? I mean, I know it's summertime in the UK, but still, the rivers in the UK.
Well, I'm a bit of a. I love cold water. I've got
Right.
into this craze that everybody seems to have done in the UK, the sort of cold water swimming. So
All
I
right.
swim in the river all year round. So it's actually a bit
Wow.
too warm for me this time of year, and also a few too many people.
Oh, right. Of course. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
wonderful. I'm envious. I think I would love to go for a swim. It's something I miss. Haven't really found anywhere in Mexico City to go swimming. I'm sure there are some places, but probably indoor swimming
You're quite
pools.
you're quite a long way from the sea, are you there?
Yeah, yeah, a couple of
Yeah,
hours, I
yeah.
think. But
Right. Yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
so thank you so much for agreeing to do this. It's great to catch up with you. I think the last time we spoke was during the pandemic when you very kindly um, did a recording with some tips about remote teaching for the IETFL Learning Technologies SIG newsletter that I was doing then. So it's great to be able to speak to you again since then.
My pleasure, Graham. My pleasure.
So, Nick, the first thing I'd love to ask you is it's a question I usually ask my guests, and that is, how did you get involved with education, with teaching?
Well, like many people in ELT, I got into it in a kind of roundabout way.
Hmm.
I actually left school and went and worked on a farm in
Wow.
Denmark. Originally, I was planning to go to agricultural college, and I did my year's practical experience on a farm. I never went to agricultural college, but ended up staying in Denmark and traveling a lot in different countries and working in different areas. And then I ended up somehow studying drama in Danish
Oh, wow.
at a drama school in Denmark. And like perhaps many people in ELT, I met a girl and I fell in love, and she was from another country. She was from Japan, and I went to Japan, and that's how I got involved in teaching English as a foreign language. In those days, this was in the late 80s, early 90s. You could basically just walk down the street. I mean, I was living in, it was very easy to find a job as a teacher in those
Yeah.
days. So that's how I ended up teaching English in Japan without any qualifications or anything at that time.
Wow. That's quite a journey you've been on. So, what was it about agriculture that appealed to you when you left school? Was it?
Well, I grew up in a rural area. I grew up in Gloucestershire. My grandparents had a farm, and I always enjoyed working on the farm when I was younger. Um, and just sort of felt it was a nice thing to do, to be outside, to work with animals and that kind of thing. So I'm obviously doing something very, very different from that now. Um, and it was a big change for me to go to a drama college. But
Mm,
that's where really I got the interest in drama and language learning, because I had the experience firsthand of being a learner of Danish and having to act and to improvise in Danish, which obviously isn't my first language, but just finding that it was a really good way to improve my language. I thought I could speak really good Danish before I went to drama
right.
college, and I realized that there was a long way to go, and also that it was a very good way of improving my language skills.
Wonderful. So that's when you made the connection between performance, drama, creativity, and language learning.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was really quite interesting having to. I mean, two things. I've always felt that drama was a very useful tool for learning a language, And I think it's useful in two ways. Firstly, because you have the sort of controlled aspect of language learning, like learning the lines of a script and having to get it right. But there's also all the other side of drama, which of course is, improvisation and being spontaneous and that kind of thing. And that's also a very important part of learning a language, I think. So, yeah, that's where my interest in drama and language learning started.
Wow.
Yeah.
And the storytelling came from that, did it? Because, there's a connection, isn't there, I suppose, between storytelling and drama as well.
Yeah. I mean, I first started teaching, as I said, when I sort of fell into it when I went to Japan. I went to follow my girlfriend. I went to see my girlfriend at that time. She lived in the south of Japan, and it very quickly didn't work out properly, the relationship. And I actually ended up moving right up to the north of Japan, to Hokkaido, to a very rural area. And I got a job teaching in a number of different schools. As I said, I didn't have any qualifications whatsoever in teaching at that time. But one of the places I worked was an agricultural college in rural Japan. And I was teaching English to huge groups of 18, 19-year-old boys, mostly, who were not interested in learning English in any way whatsoever. There were 60 students in a class. And I always remember that I came into the class and everybody would be kind of slumped over their desks, right. Completely not interested in learning. And it was I can remember it was really disconcerting as a new teacher without any experience or qualifications, having to try and teach English to this group. And I think that was a moment when I realized that perhaps working through the exercises in the course book wasn't going to motivate these young boys and young men. And I think I did that. That's where the interest in kind of creativity and also learner-centeredness started. So I can remember saying, perhaps on maybe the first day, I remember saying to the group, do you like English music? And would you like to, if so, would you like to bring in a tape? In those days, it was cassette tapes. Would you like to bring in a tape and give it to me? And I'll try and plan a lesson around this tape, around the song. And it made me laugh because the next day, one of the boys turned up with a cassette of the Motley Crue.
All right.
And I don't know if you know the Motley Crue, but they're an American heavy metal band. So I took it home with me that night and tried to think how I could plan a lesson, but I realized I couldn't actually understand a word that was being sung. So I quickly dropped that idea. But what did work with that group was using drama in a very simple way, just kind of creating simple role play, scripted role plays that they could perform, often quite silly situations in restaurants and things like that, and getting them to perform them. And I was amazed that somehow they rose to that challenge and they enjoyed getting up and performing these role plays, these dialogues in front of their classmates. And it seemed to kind of bring the class to life. So that's where it kind of started, that interest in creativity and learning, and particularly drama and language learning.
Wonderful. I find it really interesting as well that it was an agricultural college in Japan, or was that something you actually sought out? Or was it just an accident?
It was pure coincidence. It was just I just took any work that I could get, and that was just what was offered to me. So,
okay, great. And how long were you in Japan for?
Just a year.
All right.
But I sort of felt, oh, this is something I'd like to do more of. So I went back to the UK and got more qualified. Did what was called what was it called in those days before the CELTA? I think it was called something like the CTEFL qualification.
Yes, that's right.
I did that.
That's what I did.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, since then, that's what I've done with my life. Really, worked in this field.
Oh, wonderful.
So yeah.
And you also have been very much involved in training teachers and in training teachers to do this type of training teachers and using drama, creativity, and storytelling, haven't you? Helping them make their classrooms more creative. How did you get involved in that, or was it a natural progression from teaching to that?
Well, I used to work on TEFL courses, training teachers there. But I suppose, in a way, the big change was when I started to be invited by the British Council to go to places and do training sessions on things. And the first time I went to Palestine was in about 2014 or something like that. And I was invited to go and train some teachers in storytelling.
Okay.
Storytelling techniques. And that's really, I think that's one of the key things that I've tried to do in my training is, one, to help teachers to become storytellers. And when I say storytelling, I don't mean, kind of storytelling with a waistcoat and a bowl and I think storytelling is such a natural thing to do, and it's a natural progression to make it part of the classroom. I mean, Mario Rinvolucri famously said, storytelling is the oldest language teaching technique in existence.
Yes,
or the oldest teaching technique in existence. So I've always tried to support teachers in becoming storytellers and using storytelling in their teaching. And the other thing I think I've tried to do, with varying degrees of success, is support teachers in becoming less accuracy focused. And because I think, I'm sure that you've had similar experiences working in many different contexts around the world where accuracy is so much over focused on, in my opinion. And this, I think, has detrimental effects on the confidence of learners and on their ability to be creative. Because, if you've got a teacher constantly correcting them on their utterances, it can lead to a real lack of motivation.
It can inhibit communication as well, can't it?
Exactly. Yeah. So, I've really tried to kind of emphasize that. And it's not always easy, because most countries in the world still have an exam system which is based on accuracy, entirely based on accuracy. Not many countries in the world have speaking exams. Not many countries in the world value content over accuracy in terms of writing.
It's interesting,
yeah.
And Nick, to go back a little bit to the storytelling, and when you encourage teachers to become storytellers, could you tell us a little bit about how you approach that? What is it, the kind of fundamentals for helping teachers become storytellers?
Well, I think having a bank of stories is a good starting point that you can fall back on. So I wrote a book for the British Council Palestine called Stories Alive, which contains 10 simple stories that can be retold, and it also includes activities that can be done That's a free to download resource for anyone
Right.
anywhere in the world. And so that's one thing. I think just the belief that, I mean, if we're talking about contexts where students don't have many opportunities to travel, they don't have many opportunities to use English naturally outside the classroom, the teacher's voice is so important. And I just think, often that might be the only time that learners hear English being used by the
Right.
teacher, being used naturally. And it's good if the teacher isn't just talking about the present perfect continuous, but the teacher is also exposing the learners to natural language. And a very good way of doing that is through storytelling.
And do you encourage teachers to use fiction in their stories, or fact, or a combination of both?
I think it really comes down to the teacher. I think a combination of both is great. I mean, I think just telling students about what happened at the weekend or an experience that you've had is also storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very good model for students themselves, because it's the kind of story that they might do themselves, talk about what they did at the weekend, or talk about a holiday they've had, or a place that they like very much, or a person they admire, this kind of thing. So these kind of stories, I think it's great if teachers can model those kind of stories, as well as traditional stories, folk stories, that kind of thing as well.
Right. And go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I think another point. I mean, when I wrote the book Stories of Lives, one thing I tried to do was to incorporate traditional Palestinian stories into
Right.
the materials. So we've got stories like Jabena, which is a traditional Palestinian story about, it's kind of like a Cinderella story.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got stories about a woman who gave birth to a cooking pot, for instance, which is another traditional Palestinian story. So I think it's really important to use stories from the culture that you are working in as well,
Yes.
so that it's not, you're not imposing kind of British culture or culture of any other country onto the learners, but celebrating the culture of the class as well.
Of course, yes. I would imagine it's very empowering as well for learners to be able to use English, for example, to tell their own folk stories or stories that are important to them or in the culture.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if I was to put you on the spot, Nick, and ask you to give me, or to explain an activity, a storytelling activity that uses one of these stories, for example, could you give us a brief outline of what you would ask the learners to do?
Yeah, well, if it's okay, I wanted to talk about not just storytelling. I wanted to talk about another way in which an activity that I've done, something we've done very recently, actually, to kind of encourage creativity and to move away from a focus on accuracy. So
wonderful.
Recently, I think one of the things about creativity is that it's hard to be creative without any rules.
Mm-hmm.
I think that rules are a way of pushing creativity.
Right.
So we recently, in the Hands Up project, we recently ran a poetry competition for young people anywhere in the world. They had to be under 16, and they had to write a poem that was 50 words or less. And it had to be inspired by a painting. And this was a painting that was actually done by a 13-year-old girl in Gaza. And one of the first times I went to Gaza, she handed me this painting. I was about to leave. And I said, Layla, that's a beautiful painting. It was a painting of a girl sitting on a branch looking at the moon. And I said, wow, that's amazing. You want to keep that and show it to your grandchildren? And she said, no, I want you to have it. I want you to take it back to Britain and put it on your wall. So I did. And then a few years later, we decided to launch this competition, and we thought it'd be a good idea to ask young people to write a 50-word poem based on or inspired by this painting. And we had loads of entries from around the world. And I just wanted to read, if it's okay with you, I'd like to read out one of those poems.
Yes, please.
So this is by a 14-year-old girl called Amal Hasham, and she's in Gaza. And this is the poem. Moon, tell me. Oh, moon, tell me truth. Where's my place to be? I'm surrounded by people I can't even see. I'm stuck into darkness with nobody but you. No one else can hear me when I'm calling out low. Oh, moon, won't you tell me what I'm supposed to do? Now, I really love that poem. I mean, there were about 60 poems submitted, and many of them are very, very beautiful. But I think it's interesting that a poem like that, I mean, it contains inaccuracies. So, for instance, oh, moon, tell me truth. It doesn't say, tell me the truth. It says things like, I'm stuck into darkness, not I'm stuck in the darkness. I'm stuck into darkness. But I think, isn't it interesting that if that poem, if those lines were accurate in terms of the grammatical rules, it wouldn't be so poetic. So if we said, oh, moon, tell me the truth, for me, that doesn't sound, that's not nowhere near as sound as yeah, it's not so poetic, is it? Oh, moon, tell me truth. And similarly with the line, I'm stuck into darkness. I'm stuck into darkness. It's something, it's almost like it's creating something new. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about encouraging second language learners to write poems. Now, we could, as the teacher, we could get our red pen out and say, oh, you've made this mistake, and you've made this mistake here. But that would obviously be very negative for the learner. And I think it's very empowering. You mentioned the word empowering earlier. I mean, it's very empowering for the learner to feel that they can actually be creative with language, and they can give something to the language by using language in new ways. We know what the person means by that line. We understand what the person means. And in fact, they've created a new meaning by not following the rules of English.
It's very interesting, isn't it? It's a great activity as well. I love it.
So, I mean, I don't know, how long can I talk about this? I mean, there's other things as well. Of course, one of the things we do in the Hands Up Project is encourage people to make their own plays. Which is, I mean, I would say that is a kind of, that's got everything in terms of language learning. And that isn't an idea that I developed myself. I mean, no idea really comes from me. All my ideas I've stolen from other people. And I learnt this idea from a wonderful teacher in Nepal called Gobinda Puri, who worked with big classes of students in Nepal. And what he did was he got his students to work in groups and create plays in English about social issues. He would correct them. He would support them in getting the lines right, help them with the pronunciation, and eventually they'd work towards a performance of the play, which they'd do in front of their peers, but also possibly in front of parents or the whole school. And I think in terms of, it's a very creative activity, and it's also a very learner-centered activity. It involves using the ideas of the learners, embracing the ideas of the learners, encouraging them to come up with creative ideas, and but it also has a lot of scope for the kind of nitty-gritty of language learning, looking at how do you pronounce that word accurately so that people can understand you. How are you going to say that so that it has appropriate meaning? So things like intonation can come into that a lot as well.
Of course.
And of course, we all know, experienced teachers, a lot of practice is necessary in order to learn a language. And drama, and particularly creating and performing plays, provides masses and masses of language learning practice in order to learn the lines and eventually lead to performance. So it's a very rich activity.
Yeah, I was going to say that. It's one of the great things about asking students to, for example, write a script and then working through with helping them to pronounce the words, to learn the words, to learn the lines, to actually perform it, to rehearse it, and then to perform it eventually, whether it's live or recorded. I think it's a wonderful activity, isn't it? Because they're getting so much more practice of the same kind of language than they would otherwise have.
Exactly. And it's a really nice way of linking written and spoken language as well, linking because you first have to write and then turn that into spoken language. So very rich activity. Yeah.
Do you find that when the students, for example, write their scripts, it's a little stilted, it's a little bit like kind of formal written language, and you have to work with them to turn it into more sort of flowing conversational language?
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes they realize that themselves, because once they start trying to say it, they realize, this doesn't quite sound right as a spoken language. There's a fantastic teacher in Gaza called Haneen Jadala, and she's developed a really beautiful learner-centered framework for getting students to create plays, which is kind of a development of this idea, where what she does is she gets students to write stories for homework. They just write a story in English, any story, and then they work in groups and they come together and they look at each other's work, and then they decide between them which of the stories they're going to convert into a play. So I really like that because it everyone has an opportunity to create something, and as a group they decide which story they want to convert into a play. And it does that, it includes that really important technique, I think, of kind of reframing things. You create something in one format and then a written text, and then you convert it into a dialogue. How are you going to change the language if it's going to be spoken? How will things change? And I think those kind of activities are very rich.
It'll help students, learners actually become good at noticing the differences between formal, informal language, conversation, etc. as well. They kind of develop that kind of skill, don't they?
Yeah. And I think it's also something. Yeah, that's a very good point. And it's also, I think it's something about kind of supporting each other as a group.
Yeah.
Choosing a story from the group. How are you going to? It's a very democratic process to choose one story and to convert it into a play. And it's something that can be done with very large classes. I mean, often the classes in Gaza are very big. Could be up to 50 students in a class. So if we have activities like that, where students are empowered to make decisions about what's going to be a play, that can work in a large class too.
So with a large class, you obviously wouldn't have all of the students with roles, would you? So they they would be supporting the play, would they?
Yeah, so that's another thing that needs to be. I mean, if you've got students working in, say, groups of 6 working on a play, there may be some people who don't want to act, which is fine. They may want to take a more active role in the writing of the script. But I think, in my experience, it's quite nice to try to involve as many people as possible in the actual performance. Because I think sometimes drama has a little bit of a bad name because people think of it as being either, Shakespeare, you've got to be brilliant at producing fine language and, you've got to be very good at English and you've got to be an extrovert. And I think it doesn't always have to be like that. I mean, if we've got a class of 50 students and we've got 8 different groups working on 8 different plays, and then they're just performing in front of each other, it's not so challenging. And if they've got plenty of time to rehearse and to support each other, it can be a very empowering process for students to do that kind of thing.
Oh, definitely. In Uruguay, actually, where we, the remote teaching of the primary students in Uruguay that I was involved in, they've had for a number of years now a Shakespeare festival. And it isn't that they perform Shakespeare, but they take sort of the basic plots of Shakespeare and they write their own sort of versions of it and turn them into little plays which they can perform remotely, which is quite motivating.
Yeah. That's a great way of accessing literature, isn't it? To make your own version. That sounds like a brilliant idea. Make your own version of King Lear or something. Actually, that is something first time I went to Gaza, I saw a performance of King Lear, very simple version of King Lear, performed by 14-year-old girls at the conference.
Wow, sounds wonderful.
So yeah.
So Nick, if we turn to the Hands Up project, which you founded in 2015, I think, and this has developed into a project that has given many children in very difficult circumstances opportunities for learning and to an expression and creativity that they otherwise would never have had. I'd love to hear more about this initiative, how you came to found it. What was it about what you saw when you went to Palestine that actually made you think this is something I can help with?
Yeah. Well, it really started one of the early trips to Palestine, working with teachers and doing storytelling with teachers. And I realized, I mean, in a place like Gaza, we're talking about constraints and that leading to creativity. I mean, Gaza is a place which has a lot of constraints on the people living there. It's a very densely populated, one of the most densely populated places on earth. It's 2 million people in a very small space, smaller than the Isle of Wight, a very small piece of land. So most people have never left and they've never had opportunities to use English. And they've never most people have never met anyone from another country. And I thought it might be a good idea to kind of try out this storytelling online.
Yeah.
So in those days, no one had ever heard of Zoom. But we started using Zoom early on. I think we were one of the first people to use it. We used it because it had the recording facility.
Right.
And because you could screen share and webcam share at the same time. So we started using Zoom, and I just connected to a group of kids in a library in Gaza. And I just used to tell them stories. And I was using stories from the Stories Alive material. And I thought that it would be something that I would do alongside my regular job. At that time, I was working at Marjon University, training, doing teacher training and trainer training. But it didn't quite work out like that, because suddenly there were other groups that wanted to do it as well, and there were other groups in Palestine that wanted to do it, and we also started working with the Zatari refugee camp in Jordan for Syrian refugees. And also, there were people around the world who got in touch with me and said, "Hey, I've heard about what you're doing. I'd really like to be a volunteer." Early on, we had Sarah was one of our first volunteers in Spain. We also had Alex in Russia. We had Paul in the UK, and we had a few people. And then it's just grown. I mean, now we've got volunteers in something like 30 different countries around the world. And the project changed as well, in that it stopped being so much about the remote volunteer telling stories and more about supporting the kids in telling their own stories, and doing other things. I mean, we now do a number of different things. I mean, we still do tell stories online. And something I want to emphasize is that I feel that we're different from many online teaching organizations in that we don't really teach. We try not to teach, because the students have a teacher. They have a teacher already, who works with them. So it's kind of more like team teaching, really, what we're doing. All we're doing is we're supplying an opportunity for those students to hear somebody using English from another context, and also for those students to interact with somebody who doesn't speak Arabic, and somebody who is very interested in their culture and their world. So it's really a kind of team teaching thing. So out of that, we do storytelling sessions. We do kind of intercultural link-ups as well. So we link up classes in Palestine with classes in Indonesia, Argentina, Malaysia, all over the world. And we do things like intercultural show and tell. We play lots of fun games like Beat the Teacher, students versus teachers, lots of different things like that. And we've also developed this form of theatre, which we call remote theatre.
Could you tell us more about that? Does that sound? It is. I've seen part of what you've been doing with that, some example plays, etc. But I'd love to know how that developed. What made you think about making that work, and what kind of? Because I imagine there are quite a few constraints about it, from it being remote. And how do you get around those?
Certainly, yeah. Well, it kind of started from the first time I actually went to Gaza was in 2017. So I've been to Palestine lots of times before that, but it's very difficult to get into Gaza. And myself and Scott Thornbury, who's a Hands Up Project trustee, we went to Gaza for the first time, 2017. We were invited to a conference. And it was an incredible conference for many ways, for many reasons. One of them was that it was full of kids. So there were about 200 English teachers there, but there were at least 50 kids there as well. So that was partly, I think, because teachers had brought the kids along.
Right.
And also because they were going to do some performances. So it was really nice to start the conference. I've already mentioned the performance of King Lear, the shortened version of King Lear. But there was also another performance of a play that was created by the students. The whole theme of it and the story was created by the students. So as me and Scott were on our way back to Jerusalem from Gaza, we started just talking about the idea of putting on a competition to ask kids to write and perform a play. So that's how the kind of idea for the theatre competition started.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we had about, I think we had about 80 entries the first year. And the rules were that they had to make a play that was 5 minutes long, maximum 5 actors. That was it, basically.
Right.
And it was really interesting, talking about things coming from rules. Now, the idea of remote theatre was basically born by the winner, that was created by the winner of the competition. So I didn't make any rules about saying it had to be done in one take or it had to be done through Zoom. But the winning play was a wonderful play called Inner Thoughts. It was about sort of teenagers' angst, the concerns that teenagers have about feeling that everyone is better than them. A very universal theme.
Right.
But the way that this was done by a very creative teacher, Amal Mujeres, who worked with her students to help them to create this play and to perform it. But when she submitted the play, she actually submitted it through Zoom, and it was just done in one take.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to Amal, you didn't actually have to do that. It could have been done, you could edit it or whatever afterwards. But it was interesting. She won the competition, and I think that was how remote theatre started. So the next year we ran the competition.
Mm-hmm.
We had about 180 entries. And
Wow.
that year we made it a rule that they had to do it through Zoom and they had to do it in one take. So they had to, no, actually, we didn't say they had to do it through Zoom, but it had to be possible to perform it through Zoom in one take. And there was no editing allowed whatsoever, so they couldn't edit it. And if we think about it for language learning purposes, that is much better than,
of course,
enabling editing, because it was, we had some brilliant plays the first year that we ran the competition, but some of them had been heavily edited, and we did wonder whether all the kids could actually speak English, because it could be that they just practiced a particular line over and over again, filmed it, and then cut it together with lots of other bits. And I think that did happen in some cases.
Yeah.
So in terms of language learning, it's much better to do it in one take. Sorry, go on.
Of course. No, I was just going to say it's also, it puts the focus on the actual language if it's one taken away from the kind of technical editing skills or other fancy bits that you might want to sort of cut in otherwise, doesn't it?
Yeah. And also, it meant that the plays could be performed remotely. So many of those plays from that second year, they were performed. There's a big literature festival down here where I live called the Way with Words Festival. So we had 3 plays from the second year of the competition that were performed live to a big audience in the Great Hall in Dartington.
Wow.
And, 5-minute plays performed live from Gaza. And it's very beautiful to see that, and
that's very special. And again, very empowering for the kids actually performing the plays.
Exactly. Yeah.
To be part of that festival. Wow. That's wonderful.
So the competition keeps changing. The rules keep changing. We keep changing the rules. We keep making it harder and harder to participate. And so one year, when COVID happened, we were doing all this long before COVID, the remote performances of things. And of course, when COVID struck, suddenly kids couldn't do remote theatre in the way that they'd been doing it before, because they weren't allowed to get together in the same room. So
Of
schools were
course.
closed. So we did think at the beginning, okay, well, maybe we'll have to cancel the competition this year. We won't be able to run it. But little did we know that the resilience and the creativity of young people and teachers in Palestine would win through. And so a new form of remote theatre was developed, which we came to call lockdown theatre. So this meant one student per camera. So one student per camera. So this meant, this is a whole new genre of remote theatre, because you can do things like you turn off your camera, turn on, enter the stage by turning on or turning off your camera.
Right.
You could have things like voices off, so cameras off and people speaking without seeing them. So there's lots of new techniques that were born from that. And then another very creative teacher in Palestine called Hannah Mansour, when we ran the competition, we were expecting it just to be students from Palestine that entered. But she actually made a play with students in Argentina, Spain, Romania, and Gaza, all working together live on the same play.
Oh, wow. That's wonderful. Very creative.
So we thought, wow, that's a great idea. Next year, we'll nick that and we'll make it a rule. So this year, when we ran the competition, we've made it a requirement. Well, this year and last year, actually, we made it a requirement that there has to be 2 or 3 students in Palestine working together with 1, 2, or 3 students in one other country in the world. And so, and they had to perform the play together live, rehearse it live. And of course, in terms of language learning, this is even richer, because these are students whose first language isn't English. In order to communicate with each other and with the teachers in both contexts, they're going to have to use English. So it's really like the communicative approach coming into play in a very motivating way. So this year we had entries from students working in Palestine with students in Ecuador, Argentina, Malaysia, Pakistan, India, Bosnia, Serbia, Greece, Germany, Italy, Venezuela, and even Guinea-Bissau, which is, a remote village from Guinea-Bissau, which has just had the teacher managed to get an internet connection on his phone, and he was just doing it from his phone with the kids, and they performed a play called Stone Soup with 3 girls in Gaza.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. So apart from the intercultural aspect, which has got to be very enriching, you also have all of the coordination in English to actually get the play, written, rehearsed, performed, and all of that as well, which is quite a logistical feat.
Yes, it is. Well, actually, we've something I didn't mention is we've moved away from the last 2 years. We haven't asked students to write plays. We've asked them to re-perform, because we thought it'd be a bit much to get them to write it and to do it like that. I mean, all remotely. So for this year's competition, I wrote a book which is published by the Hands Up Project called Doing Remote Theatre. So this is a kind of guide for remote theatre. And we asked lots of well-known people in the field of ELT and art, theatre and literature to write plays that could be performed remotely. So we've got plays there written by David Crystal, Carol Reed, Jane Willis, Scott Thornbury, Adrian Underhill, also people from the world of theatre like Benjamin Zephaniah. And they've written these plays specially to be performed remotely. And then we asked the different groups around the world to choose a play from there to rework as a piece of intercultural remote theatre. So
Wonderful.
sometimes they've adapted the script quite heavily. They can do that, but the starting point is a script that's already there.
Right. Again, it makes it more about the speaking and more about the actual performing and communication aspect of it, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
And it makes it, they can do it with less time. If they had to develop their own script, then that would be quite extraordinary, and quite an extraordinary amount of time they'd need to invest in it, wouldn't they?
Yeah. But we do have, I mean, one of the things we're hoping to do more of next semester after the summer break is we want to go back to another technique that we've developed, which is called Our Story, Your Story. So we've tried this out in a number of different contexts, but the people who've really developed this idea is Hanin Jadala in Gaza, who I've mentioned before, but also a teacher in Argentina called Maria Teresa Continenza. And what they've done is they had this beautiful project where the students in Gaza would write personal stories. It could be funny things that have happened to them, unusual things that have happened to them. They wrote them down as stories, and the kids in Argentina did the same. And then the teachers organised for the written stories to be sent to each other. I mean, obviously, just taking a photo of it and messaged it or emailed it across. And then the kids in Argentina had to choose one of the stories and make a remote performance out of it, and vice versa. So the kids in Gaza did the same with the Argentinian stories. And it's really, really interesting. And then they performed them back to the original authors through Zoom. And it's really interesting because there was a story, for instance, that was written by the Argentinians about having a party and the police arriving because they were making too much noise in the house and being very scared. And then, to see that reperformed by kids in another country, and a very different country, such as Gaza, it's a really interesting. Well, one, it's very empowering for the original author to see their story reperformed by someone.
I can imagine.
Context. And it's just such a rich way of intercultural learning to happen, to understand. I think you can really understand or begin to understand a culture by trying to perform their stories. So it's really interesting. Yeah.
And do you encourage them to adapt it and change some of the cultural elements, or to actually just interpret it as it's been written?
It just happens naturally, I think. That does. I mean, I think both things happen. In one way, they try to be as true to the story as they can, as true to the original story. So they might try and put Palestinian music into it or something.
Okay.
But at the same time, that process of naturally converting it to your own context happens anyway. So it kind of comes from a theatre technique called playback theatre.
Right.
Which I don't know if you've come across.
I haven't. No.
So it's a form of theatre that it's very popular in Scandinavia and also in the UK. But it's a kind of theatre where you go and as the audience, you go and you might tell a story. The actors will invite you to tell a story about something that's happened to you. And then the actors will spontaneously perform your story back to you.
Oh, wonderful.
And it's it's very funny. Sometimes it can be very funny. Sometimes it can be very tragic. But the interesting thing about it is you see somebody else's perspective on what you've done. So it's there is something therapeutic about that. There's something empowering and something, maybe it's a way to address a problem if you can see somebody else's interpretation of your problem. So it's, yeah.
So that isn't what you do, though. With it, in a way, it's because the students or the learners and the teachers are taking a written script and just performing it and maybe adapting it.
Exactly. Yeah, we work with the written script because I think there are some advantages in slowing down the process a little bit and working with a written script. It's quite hard to. You've got to be a pretty good actor to spontaneously reperform somebody's
improvise
story.
And reperform it.
Yeah.
I'll definitely seek out that type of theatre, though. It sounds like it's a really fun thing to watch.
Yeah.
I'm
great. Sure there must be a playback theatre in Mexico City. There must be some version of that, I would imagine. Yeah.
I'm sure there is. I haven't been to the theatre much here, so I need to start going, I think. But Nick, I think I'm right in saying that you have also organised an annual conference in the UK and have done for a few years now.
Yeah. That's right.
Is that related to the remote theatre as well, or just the remote theatre play part in that?
It does, yeah. We always have a conference. We normally have it straight after the IATEFL conference, just so that we can kind of steal the IATEFL audience for our conference.
Good idea. In the same place, or?
Yeah, so this year it was in Harrogate.
Right.
It was actually in a Quaker meeting house in Harrogate, which is a really lovely venue to have our conference. So it's quite a small conference. We had about less than 100 people, I think, at the conference.
That's still a fair number of people.
Yeah. And we have a different theme each year. Mm-hmm. This year, the theme was Learner Voices.
Right.
So we started the conference actually this year, the night before, with some live plays performed from Gaza to everyone who wanted to come the night before. And then a discussion with the actors afterwards. Mm-hmm. And then we had, we've had lots of poetry reading, some of the poems that were submitted for the competition.
Oh, yeah.
We had Harry Kucha Kucha there. We had Jane Willis there. We had Adrian Underhill. We had Haneen Jadala there. Ashraf Kuhail, who is our scholarship winner this year. We run a IATEFL scholarship every year for a person who's been involved in Hands Up from Palestine to come to the IATEFL conference and also our conference. We also presented the really exciting results that we've just got of our research. So we've been researching the impact on motivation and attitudes towards English of doing online link-ups. And this is with large classes in Gaza, 50 students in a class.
Wow.
We've been looking at how, just over quite a short period of time, just 8 classes, once a week for 8 weeks, linking to a remote volunteer for a 40-minute class out of 5 40-minute classes. Just wanted to see whether there was any change in their confidence and in their motivation to study English. And so we're presenting the results of that. And that's very exciting because the results are fantastic. It really shows that there is an improvement, a big improvement.
Wonderful.
And not just for the ones who are, obviously in a class of 50 students, not everyone is going to have the chance to come up and interact with the remote volunteer. But the change in motivation was across the board. Even those students who not had any opportunity to interact.
Right.
But
Interesting.
It's interesting. Just the fact that they were in the class improved their
And
motivation.
how did you measure that, Nick? Was it
So
was it through observation?
no, it's through a questionnaire that was done at the beginning of the study and at the end, and we did it through a research organisation in Birmingham who kind of analysed all the, told us how to do it, and because I'm not really very familiar with doing research, but the good thing about it, we did a randomized control trial. We actually had quite large numbers, so we had 200 students in the experimental group and 200 in the control group, and everything was the same. So it's the same teacher, same course book, same numbers of hours of English, same school. The only thing that was different was that in the experimental group, they linked once a week to a remote volunteer. And that was to do kind of intercultural activities and that kind of thing. Trying to bring the course book to life, really. That was sort of focus of it, trying to interculturalize the course book. So,
and those who were part of that, their motivation was increased because of it.
Yeah,
I guess was the result. That's wonderful.
Yeah. So I think there'll be other contexts in the world. I mean, in some ways, Gaza is quite extreme in the situation because people have been through wars, etc. But there are many contexts in the world where people don't have the opportunity to really use their English naturally. So,
I would imagine this is something that most groups of language learners in schools could take advantage of and set up to have that intercultural aspect of it. Yeah. If someone was, someone wanted to do that, Nick, what would you recommend? How would they get it off the ground?
If they wanted to do intercultural link-ups with somebody, well, I mean, in
particular with theatre or drama or storytelling. Well,
they could get in touch with us. Send us an email, and we can link people up with students in Palestine. If somebody wants to do an intercultural link up with a group in Palestine, we can facilitate that. It's interesting. My sister is a French teacher in the UK, French and Spanish. And when I told her about it, she said, gosh, I'd really like to do that with my students because, England, British schools have much more resources and the students have a lot more opportunities to travel than they do somewhere like Gaza. But still, those students lots of students have very rare, have had few opportunities to really use the French that they're learning. So I think even in a context like the UK, it could be useful. So if people want to do that kind of thing, it's relatively simple to set up, I would imagine, if you've got the right contacts. If you can contact somebody in another country, and
that's the important thing, isn't it? And then of course you have the book that you mentioned before that has plays. That would be good, and how to actually to do the theatre. That would be a good resource as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah. That's available on our website. Doing Remote Theatre, available on the Hands Up website. We've also got books of plays. When we used to run the competition and we asked young people in Palestine to create their own plays, we also publish a book of 30 of the best plays. We publish a book of those. So those books are also available on our website. And it's really interesting because we've had different versions of those plays created by learners of English in other parts of the world. So a few years ago, I was in Peru speaking at a conference, and talking about the Hands Up project, and somebody bought a book. One of the teachers bought a book, and a couple of months later, she said, I've got something to show you," and she sent me videos of her students performing plays that were originally created by young people in Palestine. And this is adult learners of English. We've also had students at University of Exeter performing plays that were originally created by learners in Palestine. So we've got lots of different versions around the world. And I think in a way that's the ultimate empowering activity for students to see their own play reperformed by somebody else.
I would love to hear now, Nick, about what the future holds, either for Hands Up or for yourself, or what kind of plans have you got for the future?
Well, as I said, we're really excited about the research that we've just got. So we want to really develop that side of things in Hands Up. We want to start working more with large classes, whole classes, classes that are working with the curriculum. Yeah. I mean, it's one thing to be able to do link ups with small groups of motivated learners who love English and who are good at English, but it's another thing to be able to do it with the whole class, with students who don't necessarily love English and who aren't that able to communicate that well. So that's the direction we want to go in. I mean, it's been great to do remote theatre in terms of making connections for young people in Palestine.
Yeah,
but I think we've done it a lot now, and I think we're not going to stop doing it. But I think our emphasis is going to be more moving towards. We want to become more mainstream, I suppose. We would like it if every school in Palestine had the opportunity to do an intercultural link up with a remote volunteer somewhere.
How many schools do you reach at the moment, and what kind of percentage of the schools in Palestine are you able to interact with?
Really hard to say. I mean, in the time of COVID, we were pretty much accessing everyone because we started doing. Wow. We moved all our operations over to Facebook Live.
Right.
So all the schools were closed, and we were doing storytelling sessions on Facebook. And there were thousands and thousands of people who have seen those videos live and also seen the recordings later. And we were actually asked by UNRWA. UNRWA is the United Nations Relief and Work Agency who provide education to Palestine's refugee community. We were asked by them to do curriculum-based sessions on Facebook.
Oh, wow.
Which we did as a kind of team teaching thing. So we did it with a Palestinian teacher and a remote volunteer presenting live on Facebook. And, that had its own, obviously that's not quite the same as doing it through Zoom because you couldn't see the learners. All the learners could do was write comments in the chat.
So less interaction, basically.
Yeah, but in a way, yeah. I mean, that was a disadvantage, but it was also, there were some advantages, I think, in that more people could access the sessions. Right. They could watch the recording later.
In Zoom, and also, it would have been limited, the amount of people. Yeah, and it would have been closed, whereas Facebook, it was kind of open and unlimited.
Yeah, and also people could do it from their own homes where they often, with a mobile phone, they've often got a better internet connection on a mobile phone than they would have in the schools. I mean, this has always been the problem.
Of course.
Working in a place like Gaza, very weak internet connection. Sometimes it's just been impossible to do link-ups. So that's one thing we're going to do. We're going to be running a series of in the summer when schools are closed, we try to have a series of kind of summer fun activities. So we're going to do a few Facebook Live events. We've teamed up with a local artist called Ken Maharaja, who is going to be doing a session with story and art. So he's going to be working with a storyteller, helping kids to draw pictures that come from the story. And, that's an interesting, I think it's going to be called Every Picture Tells a Story or something like that. And then there's going to be, one of the things that we really love doing is this activity, we call it Students versus Teacher. So we're going to be we use that to focus on different areas of the curriculum other than English. So we might ask students to prepare questions about chemistry or biology or geography or something, a different area of the curriculum, but to prepare them in English and then test the teachers that are in the room, in this case, the remote volunteers. So they get a point if we get it wrong, and we get a point if we get it right.
Oh, that's a really good idea.
I can imagine.
I can imagine the students preparing very difficult questions for that. But that's wonderful because it means that they're doing the research to actually look for hard questions that they think teachers wouldn't be able to know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
That's great.
I've forgotten what the question was now.
Oh, it was just about any future projects which you talked about for yourself and or the Hands Up project. So I think you probably answered that.
I think I have.
Wonderful.
I think I have, yeah.
Nick, I'm going to draw things to a close. I just want to thank you so much for coming on and spending time talking to me and sharing what your educational journey personally and with what's led to you working with the Hands Up project, starting that and doing all that wonderful work in Palestine and in other places as well. It's been fascinating talking to you, and I wish you all the best for the future with this.
Thank you, Graham. It's been a real pleasure to be here. And if I can just say, if anybody is interested in getting involved in what we do, please send us an email to info@handsupproject.org. If you'd like to link up a class with a class in Palestine for intercultural exchange, if you'd like to become a remote volunteer for us, we're always looking for storytellers or just people in different contexts to link to a class in Palestine. Please do get in touch with us. And especially if you'd like to get hold of one of our books and get your learners of English to perform a play originally created by young people in Palestine, that would also be wonderful.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you very much, Nick. I presume you're not going for another swim now?
No, I am going to a barbecue.
Oh, wonderful. We'll have a fantastic time.
I went to a friend of mine's house who's doing a barbecue. So
that's great. Enjoy the barbecue. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. And thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much, Graham. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye. So that brings us to the end of today's Twilight Show, everybody. Many thanks to today's special guest, Nick Bilborough, and all of you who joined us live. And thank you to anyone also who's listening back to the podcast recording as well. That's all for me. That's it from me. And there are Teachers Talk radio shows all week on all manner of interesting topics with wonderful guests. So please listen in live or to the recordings of those shows as well. I hope you will join me again next week at the same time. And bye for now.
It's time for a fresh start to language learning. Pearson EdXL's new student-centred French, German and Spanish 2024 GCSEs cater to the needs of all learners, regardless of their background, ability or reason for studying. Rooted in learned language knowledge, their assessments are transparent and accessible, allowing all students to showcase their language skills. Through inclusive and relatable content, the new Pearson EdXL MFL GCSEs build a shared cultural capital that helps students develop an understanding of and appreciation for the wider world. Find out more at go.pearson.com/MFL GCSE 24.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.